Okay, everybody, thank you for tuning in to episode 8 of Dano Says So. Today, I am interviewing an old friend. So many of the people we're interviewing on this thing are old friends, but John is truly someone I ran with, shot pool with, cried late at night to and everything else, which was an interesting way to end up because I initially found out about John and met John as a person simply because I was in awe of his work. Now, about that work, John is not the most recognizable face in the counterculture, but his work is some of the most recognizable because his skill set is extremely varied, his technique is impeccable, and the places that he's applied that technique, Maximum RocknRoll, Alternative Tentacles, his own label, Allied, his books, are highly visible and highly impressive. So John Yates, thank you for doing this.
Yeah, thank you.
All right. So, talking about technique that's impeccable, talking about highly recognizable work, you got a lot of attention lately for your take on the Blue Note series, doing the Punk Note cover knockoffs. Can you tell me about that?
Yeah, well, relatively new to Instagram. I think I made my first post in February, and
Okay.
I've been encouraged to do that just to try and get myself out there a little bit more. Reluctantly gave into social media, which I'm not particularly connected with, but I figured it was an outlet, it's just like somewhere to just spout off and soapbox.
For somebody who's as visual as you are, I'd think it'd be addicting or somehow a business or psychological necessity.
Well, that's the thing. I'd resisted it for a long time. I had an account for like maybe 5 years before I even used it. So
okay.
That and my Twitter account, which I've used like 3 times in 5 years as well, I think. But no, so I did kind of get sucked into it. And so I was starting to do that on a sort of fairly regular basis. And then the pandemic hit, and then lockdown started, and then I lost my job. And then a few days later, I lost my longtime girlfriend. So I was kind of spiraling, and I needed something to really dive into on a daily basis to give me something to do and just keep me distracted, honestly. So I kind of, in the past, on a couple of projects, records that came out, the Lifetime one, Jersey's Best Dancers, for example, I had previously sort of toyed with the whole Blue Note aesthetic. I mean, I grew up spending weekends with my brother and my grandparents, and they were big jazz fans, mostly big band, but there was some Blue Note stuff in the house, I remember, which was kind of unusual because they're very white, very English, very elderly, but they just had this affinity for jazz. So I vaguely remembered it when I was older, and certainly not in my sort of youth punk rock years. I mean, I definitely was just very tunnel visioned at that point, but as I've gotten older, I've certainly in the last 20, 30 years, I've definitely sort of rediscovered my love of jazz. And certainly the Blue Note aesthetic was always something that really spoke to me.
To me, it kind of matched your skill set, a lot of your really technical sort of fine line work and your sort of exacting style. So I could have seen you going into it purely with an appreciation for that. But hearing that you actually like the old stuff is interesting, because then you get to apply one love to another,
Yeah. It definitely, I'm definitely, if I'm nothing else, as far as a graphic designer goes, I'm a very good mimic. Like, I can take pretty much any style and reproduce it to serve my ends. And some would argue I've made an entire career out of that, but come on, man, that is what it is. But no, it was just something that I really had. I sort of had a lot of notes on that project that I'd wanted to get to for ages, and I just hadn't at the time. And so I literally just decided, okay, I need something to do. So I just dived in, and basically in 2 weeks, I came up with like, I think 270 total.
So the sheer volume of them, Martin Sprouse and I were talking about, the sheer volume of them was amazing. Without really a dip in quality. So I'm gonna go out on a limb here and say you developed a few methods and a few go-tos, and were able to just keep stirring the pot and applying. It seems to me like there's this in your brain now. There's got to be the Blue Note folder. You know, these are some of the critical elements in recreating that imagery. Or maybe I'm wrong.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely. I mean, once you sort of understand Reed Miles is aesthetic, once you understand that and recognize it, I mean, you'd be surprised. I mean, there's maybe a dozen typefaces he worked with, you know, certain colorways. So yeah, you sort of get a system down pretty quickly. So 270 in 2 weeks sounds like a lot. And then there were also a bunch of outtakes. Like for a lot of those covers, I did maybe 3 to 4 different ones and ended up just publishing the ones that I was most happy with. So there are definitely, you know, outtakes per se.
Well, it's fantastic work, and I definitely want you to send me, you know, 4 or 5 favorites for me to flash over the screen while this conversation is going on. You know, while we're discussing the pieces, I'd like people to see what they're talking about because it's clearly remarkable.
Okay.
Yeah. Are any of them actually going to be used for any reissues or anything like that? The only reason I ask is because we both know that I immediately went begging to you to have you do something for my band in that exact vibe. And,
right.
You know, I'd like to believe I'm one of the first to the well.
Yeah, actually, it was funny. 2 labels did approach me. One was De Kreutzen. They were doing a reissue of their first, like, I think, cassette demo, and so digital only. So they wanted a digital cover, and they wanted to just use the one I'd used in the series, and that was great. You know, it was fun. I was a fan of them for a long time. Well, certainly the early stuff. So that was cool. And then out of the blue, a label who is working with Bad Brains contacted me. So I'm actually going to be doing the Bad Brains covers for very, very limited edition vinyl.
Those will be incredible. But is dealing with that operation a little bit of a sticky wicket, or would you rather not go into it?
In what way?
I just imagine business for some reason. I imagine business with the Bad Brains being incredibly complicated.
Well, that may well be the case. I'm dealing strictly with the label that's helped them. They're basically doing a sub label for Bad Brains to release their stuff through.
Okay.
So they're serving as like the umbrella label, and they're doing reissues, you know, exactly as they originally were, and then they're doing a 500, possibly 1,000 run of my Blue Note covers.
Okay, for the Bad Brains, that's rare, but that's not as rare as it used to be, man. You move 1,000 records nowadays. You don't really need to be ashamed.
I know, but it will be really cool just to see those realized. It may not be the same photography just because of rights issues and stuff like that. So, and you know, it's not a particularly big label, so obviously they can, you know, their budget only goes so far. So, and licensing a Glenn Friedman photo is never going to happen on their budget. You know, it's
okay.
Sadly, but you know, and I recognize that, but I didn't have any requirements when I just chose photography because I was never going to make anything commercial out of it. So, you know, it was never. I mean, my one regret about the series was that I should have credited every photographer that I used in the post, and I feel bad about that. I should have done that.
Hey man, really Instagram is editable, but you did 200 of the damn things.
Yeah, I know. Also, there was only so many that I actually could source and find out who the photographer was. So, you know,
well, so we're sitting here and we're talking about these Blue Note interpretations of punk rock records. The fact of the matter is, on your own label and for Alternative Tentacles, you've created the packaging for a lot of notable rebel music. That, to me, segues well into the fact that when left to your own devices on Instagram, anywhere else, even in your books, you tend to do very subversive and very provocative work.
Yeah. I definitely like to stir that pot as much as possible, even if it's only just to get a conversation started. I mean, really, that's all my work.
You're asking my follow-up for me. I was going to say, to what ends?
Yeah, I mean, that's always been the sort of backstory behind all my work. Is just like, is this something that can start a conversation? It doesn't have to be someone that agrees with me. It doesn't have to be something that is lockstep with what I'm saying. It's just like, is that going to spark a conversation? And I think that's a lot of what the best sort of socio-political artwork does, whether it be, you know, and typically I mean, I came out of punk rock in the UK, and I was a crass addict. I followed Discharge. The first band I picked up from the US was Dead Kennedys, and that was because I always had a really strong political bent, and that's just been my upbringing. You know, my grandfather was a staunch socialist, which is a negative term in this country, but over there in Europe, it was really not. You know, but he was a lifelong socialist, and I had many pep talks from him as a kid.
Yeah.
So I think that really just kind of sank in, and I've always kind of tried to say something with what I'm doing. It might not be everyone's cup of tea. It might not be something that's, you know, it might be a little obtuse at times. I definitely think I can go there sometimes, but yeah.
To me, your voice can at times, and I'm talking about your visual voice, it can be at times British. Your take on the language is not always immediately available to me. That's extremely rare. But I never find you being particularly obtuse. What I find amazing is that you can get involved in these very highly technical pieces. You've done work for me that only takes you moments, but was so far beyond my skill set it wasn't even funny. And then you can do things like, you know, America We Deliver, there's an American Bible Belt, pieces like that. They're incredibly simple, but they hit like hammers. Do you have a preference one way or the other? I mean, you know, in terms of construction?
Right. No, I think typically how I work one of two ways. It's either I come up with like a phrase first, and then I try and visualize it, or I come up with a visual and then I try to put words to it, depending on what message I'm trying to send, I guess.
Right.
So it can work either way, but less is always more. And the English aspect to it, I guess, is natural, just given that that's where I'm from. But also, I think it's also a product of a different education system.
I'm a linguistics fiend. I'm hypersensitive to the way people speak and to their choice of words. And if you'd ever met my mother, it'd make all the sense in the world.
But yeah, I think it's just basically a product of that upbringing. Also, my grandfather used to always, I got exposure to like Spy magazine, which was a satirist publication in the UK that was very political, kind of like a published version of Spitting Image, but not in that, you know, I don't know if anyone knows what Spitting Image is these days, but it was.
You know, I don't think our viewership is going to be a lot of 19-year-olds. I don't think we need to worry.
But no, I mean, you know, it's the same as growing up with like Python or all that kind of stuff. I mean, there's this political undercurrent in all their work. You know, it might be hilarious, and it's certainly translated across the Atlantic. But you know, the fundamental core of that is class structure and politics, but handled in a humorous way. And while my work has humor in it, albeit in a dark nature, some of it, I think that is important also, is to make
sarcasm is
sarcasm.
knows your stuff pretty well. Sarcasm's a key element that works beautifully.
Yeah, sarcasm I think really can sell. You know, I really like, it's like people either, especially here, they either love or they loathe Ricky Gervais. You know, it's like, as one example, and he's like
very true.
He's like the vanguard right now of like how British sarcasm works. You know, and it's just. So, and it really teeters on that edge of offense or not offense. And so I really enjoy that aspect. And I think, you know, while I'm clearly not Ricky Gervais, I mean, I think I have that, you know, that background, that English background where sarcasm and politics are very much intertwined.
Right. Well, let's take the Dano Says So John Yates machine to England now. You gave me a good segue. So, I mean, I'd like to hear, you know, some encapsulation of your education, particularly of your education in this, you know, in art, in graphic arts, in whatever, and just the path. Because, you know, you mentioned a lot of things just in passing already in this interview that we're all familiar with, but didn't have a lot of people in the States had very much up close exposure to. You know, you were obsessed with bands that I've covered and never been in the same room with. So, you know, let's hear about pre-America John Yates, and then we'll get into some of the amazing things you were involved in over here.
Okay. Well, I mean, I didn't go to art school, but I went to two-year technical colleges, we call them in the UK. So,
Okay.
and had, graduated both those. One was sort of a general art, history, graphic design, printmaking, ceramics, sort of a smorgasbord of art pursuits back in the day. I mean, most of those wouldn't even be taught these days, I imagine. But and then the second two-year stint was in editorial design and graphics and photography.
What does editorial design mean?
Fundamentally, they were training you to be to work at either newspapers or magazines. So
Okay.
that was the background of that. So, and I was ready to finish the equivalent of high school with basically ready to take my place on unemployment. But thanks to my mom, one time at sort of parent-teacher night, took the time to go and check out my work in the art department. And the teacher just kind of cornered her, and it was just like, you have got to get him into art school. I said, like, I don't care what you do, just get him into art school. He can do it, And
Your teacher was right.
I had never even thought of it. I honestly had never even thought of it. I'm just like, I don't know what I'm going to do. There was nothing that, my career as a professional soccer player was never going to happen. So that was choice one, and choice two, unemployment, So
I feel for you. I
it was one of those weird mixes in the UK where it's like, I was definitely like hardcore punk rock kid, but also over here I'd be the equivalent of a total jock as well. Like, cause I just love sports.
No, I remember that about you when we were both living in the Bay Area.
Yeah.
All I was going to say is, yeah, I never got to grow up to be the white Muhammad Ali, so I'm lucky I found punk rock as well. How does John and art school and this undeniable talent that these women saw, how does it find its way to actual involvement in and contribution to punk rock?
Okay, so how did I end up doing what I do?
I kind of want to know what your first punk rock work was, who was it for, and how'd you meet them?
I honestly can't remember. It was probably some ad artwork for Alternative Tentacles. Like, they had a London office back when the band was at their Dead Kennedys were at their peak. They'd started a London office to distribute their records directly there. And I, as a fan, used to buy mail order records from them, because their releases, when they all came out with these two-sided like inserts of artists from the States that I'd never even heard of. So I would just buy everything based on the cover. So, I'm like buying MDC, I'm buying Bad Brains, I'm buying like Black Flag, I'm buying, whether that's through like Let 'Em Eat Jelly Beans or something else, so I'm buying all this stuff because where I grew up was pretty isolated. So I had the access to the music press like Sounds or NME, but other than that, it was, there was no way of finding out about stuff. It was before I went away to college. It was before I was trading tapes left, right, and center. So I ended up sort of sending little bits of artwork back and forth to the London office of Alternative Tentacles, and unbeknownst to me, they were sort of forwarding it on to Biafra. I was doing a zine at the time, like just a Xerox zine of my artwork. I would send those every now and again, and so they were using me sporadically to do like ads and some basic stuff like that. And then I think I got a couple of records through them, not for Alternative Tentacles, but through the guy who was running the label for them had another English label. So I did a little bit of work for them. And then I ended up getting some work through like a couple of the UK like kind of crusty labels.
Mm-hmm.
Like I did work for like Decadence Within and, some of that Doom, some of that early like grindcore, crustcore from the UK.
A lot of high contrast,
the first thing I ended up,
a lot of high contrast black and white.
Yeah, a lot of high contrast black and white. Yeah, I mean it was you couldn't afford color back in those days.
Fair enough.
And then I ended up out of the blue. I got contacted by Biafra one time in the mail and just asked if I would like to help him put together the booklet for DK's Swan Song compilation, Give Me Convenience or Give Me Death. So that was the first thing I officially worked on for Alternative Tentacles directly. And we did that through the mail. I mean, he would send me clippings, and I just basically had to put the pages together, and I'd send them back and hope that everything stayed on, because it was all just glue and spray, spray adhesive back then. And send it back in the U.S. mail to him, and he'd tweak with it and stuff like that. And then sometimes it would come back, and other times he'd just do it there. And then somehow we managed to put that booklet together in the mail, and that was my first experience. Okay. And then I was going to go out for I decided I was going to visit the States, so I went out for 2 months to San Francisco in, I think, summer of '87.
Okay.
'86. Worked for a couple of months quietly under the table for the label, did some work there, and then went back home, really kind of crestfallen. I loved it. I mean, it was like, well, it's not the love about the Bay Area. And it was certainly not Thatcher, England, which is definitely what I was living at that time. So the following year, Biafra asked if I had any interest in coming out to work for the label full time, because they needed an art person. If I could get out there, the job was mine, kind of thing. So I just basically gave away or sold everything I had, and I just got on a plane and moved, and then I didn't think I was going to stay here forever, but that's how it ended up. So in a nutshell,
I'm 90% sure, and it all blurs together because I've been punched in the head far too many times, but I'm 90% sure we met at Maximum Rock and Roll House.
We did. Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Well, so I moved to the States in about '88, and then I think I moved into MRR about maybe '89, like the following year or something like that. Yeah. And I lived there on and off for 2 stints at different times, I think. So, yeah.
Yeah. How did you feel about that experience? Maximum Rock and Roll is an interesting stopover for a lot of colorful personalities and a lot of extremely talented people.
Yeah. No, it was great. I mean, it was a really fun time. I could have done without the stupid nickname I was given in the house, but that's another story.
I don't remember you having a nickname there, and if you hate it that much, you don't have to share it.
No, it was just ridiculous. It was like so they were like they were playing some. I think it was they were playing Heresy or something like that, and I think it was Harry Sherrill, who used to be in Cringer. I think he was there at the time, and he was looking on the back of the records, and he's like, why do all English people have 3-letter names like Baz and Dez and all this stuff? And I'm just like, I don't know. And then everyone was just like, yeah, so what's John? I'm like, it's John because it's like 4 letters. What's it going to be, Joe? So they decided, I think it was Johannan decided, oh, we're going to call him Jaws. Joz. And I got really pissed off, I think, and just stormed off down to my room. But they only used it internally and a couple of times in print, which was kind of.
Hey man, I worked there and it never made it to me, so don't feel too bad.
But yeah, so no, I really enjoyed my time at Maximum. Tim was great. It was a great mentor, and I hadn't even touched a computer until I moved there, and so that was kind of unique, and that was an old Mac 2, I think, like a little cube.
I remember Maximum Rock, that living room on Clipper Street used to seem like the bridge of the Enterprise to me.
Yeah.
And now when I remember what was actually in that room and in use, it seems more like the Flintstones.
Basically, yeah. If we could have stuck our feet through the floor and just ran, that would have been perfect.
Absolutely.
But no, it was good. There was always people coming and going, whether it be bands staying or just people visiting, and then also just the transition of staff, in and out, like people, sometimes they only stay for a month or 2, and I was like, I ended up being there for like, I think maybe 2 years or something like that. So it varied, but yeah, it was a really cool, fun environment, and it was a great place to sort of softly land into the U.S. culture that was, ended up being home.
My connection there made my arrival in the Bay Area easier, and for other reasons it made it harder later, but it was still central. No 2 ways about it,
Yeah.
Maximum Rock and Roll was in a lot of ways a nucleus of a lot of things.
Oh yeah, definitely.
During that time, Ramsey Kanaan eventually ended up out in the States,
Yes.
right? And
Yes.
and that led to the books.
Mm-hmm.
So you want to talk a little bit about that, about your work being compiled in print?
Yeah. Oh, my books.
Yeah.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah. Well, no,
Yeah.
Ramsey
Well.
leads to all trails Ramsey inevitably lead to books. But yeah,
Right.
I'm talking about your work compiled in print.
Well, yeah. I mean, I've done the zine Punchline for a couple of years, and so Ramsey and AK Press at the time approached me and asked if I'd like to do a book, and that was what became the first book, and that was, that, and then subsequently to that,
Can you send me files of the covers?
Yeah, I can send covers.
Okay.
Yeah, yeah.
I shouldn't interrupted your flow. Anyway, go on.
No,
Okay,
that's
what
fine.
became the first book?
So yeah, so the first book happened, and then I wasn't doing Punchline anymore after that, but I was still doing work.
Mm-hmm.
But I didn't really have anywhere to collect that. So subsequently, there were 2 more books after that. And none of them really particularly, had much of an impact. I think you're talking 3,000 copies a piece or something like that. But
I was on tour. I was on tour in South Dakota, and pages from your books were blown up on the walls in the main Krusty house in that town.
Oh yeah,
where Speak 714 was crashing. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, it got around, and it was fun to do the books. It was fun to do Punchline while I did it. It wasn't just me on my own. I would have guest, artists involved as well. I mean, including Martin, and stuff. So, but then, then I did. Then there was a large gap between, I think, publishing the last book and then me really doing much of anything, like socio-political graphics wise. I did other things. I mean, I sort of.
No, go. You.
No, I was just going to say,
you're going
I
to
sort of
answer my question, so I'm not going to ask it.
I concentrated more on doing other people's books, covers and stuff like that, than my own stuff. And then I haven't really gotten back into it until recently with the whole Instagram thing, and that has really kind of given me another sort of outlet, So I've really kind of thrown myself into that.
I mean, would you agree that even though the world's always a little bit monkey fucked, there's certainly an embarrassment of riches as far as source material goes right now in America?
Yes, sadly it's just endless at this point. Yeah, I mean, you could go all day and just generate stuff. Yeah, it's frightening how easy it is actually right now to do work.
Well, I don't know about easy, but one of the things that freaks me out is typically something horrifying can hit the news. Maybe in the last 48 hours, Americans really became aware of, at the time that we're shooting this or recording this, of the unmarked troops that are, stashing people in vans in Portland, right?
Yeah, yeah.
Was it even 24 or 48 hours before you had pieces referring to that up on Instagram? And they're good pieces. They're not 3 words in a photo. They've got, you've got some execution and construction to them. I mean, that's incredibly fast turnaround.
Yeah, although the one I did post today about Portland, it actually is a picture in 3 words. So you're wrong.
What are you trying to say, Dan?
But no, it's almost like, it's like it basically writes itself with this administration, right? I mean, sadly, it's just, but it's also, yeah, it's funny to talk about it, but in a really twisted way, because it's just so fucking dark. I mean,
well, to me, the great potential horror, besides all the president shit, and I'd be curious to see what you think, is people tend to underestimate the nastiness of history while it's unfolding right in front of them. Like they'll realize that something's fucked, but they won't realize that it's potentially gateway drug, the gateway drug to massive horrors.
Right.
Do you think it's a very real possibility that if Trump loses in November, he doesn't turn over the office in January?
Yeah, I feel it's a very real possibility. Even if he's only grandstanding at this point, given the sort of rabid nature of his base, and he's already setting them up on that road so that if he does lose, which hopefully he does, but if he does lose, there's those seeds of doubt, which do not need any watering, are already out there, that it's going to be illegitimate. So I think there is potential, not for him to not actually leave office, but for his base to really get scary, like way scarier than they are now.
Throughout any political climate in the probably 30 plus years you've been doing this, what were the most satisfying pieces? What made them satisfying? Was it the quality of your execution? Was it the clarity of the message? Some combination of it,
Yeah, a combination. I mean, there's always my air quotes classics, I'm still, I'm my own worst critic when it comes to my work. And there's a lot of stuff that I honestly could care less. I mean, if I ever saw it again, but there are some that, really, I think I've either stood the test of time or sadly, because they're relevant. But also they were just effective and simple, like the Democracy We Deliver or American Bible Belt or.
Any record covers that work for you more than others?
Record covers, yeah. I mean, I think probably if I had to list off some of my favorites in terms of like how they turned out and how they stood up. Certainly, all the collaborations I used to do with Adam for Jawbreaker, I'm very proud of those. I mean, those were always fun projects, and it was a joy to work with Adam and the band to put those together. So those have always, they hold a really dear place in my heart for those ones. The Lifetime records.
Yeah.
Let's see what else. The work I did with Alkaline Trio, I think the series of records I did with them for a few years, I'm really happy with those. I also, it was one of the rare occasions when they were, working with a major label where you had a big budget. So I got to do a couple of special editions, which were kind of blowout. And that was really fun because in my world, you don't get to work with those kind of budgets much. So that was really nice, so, and they came out really nicely. And then one of the ones I've been most happy with recently within the last like 2 or 3 years is this tiny little band from northeastern France that I did artwork for. It's called Red Gloves. I don't think they're even around anymore, but maybe they are, I'm not sure. But I did 2 singles and an album for them, and they were thematic. And honestly, it's some of the work I'm most happy with.
Okay, so for the purposes of this thing, I'm gonna send you an email, and I'm gonna watch this tape, and I'm gonna see the stuff that you mentioned that has me scratching my head. I got to see that moments, and I'm gonna have you send them to me. Okay.
Okay.
Because these are gonna be audio podcasts eventually, but they're YouTube now.
Yeah.
And YouTube benefits from visuals.
Right.
So listen, John, we're at about a half hour, and you and I have all the freedom in the world to do as many of these as we want. So I'm going to sign off, barring anything any statements you want to make before I do so.
Nope. I think.
Well, so here's the story, sir.
Yes.
There's one thing in this interview that really disturbed me, and that was that you went through this long period of inactivity, and you only recently jumped back on it. You know, if that did you some good, great, all hail. But if not, man, the world needs you working. You're the visuals to a very large community and a very large mindset, and I am glad I can see your work every day. Okay, sir?
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, John.
All right, man. Take care.